Hi everyone, this is Richard. In this video, we are going to go over anonymous functions. Anonymous functions is not something we're probably going to use a lot anytime in the future until we get really experienced and comfortable with using functions and just code in general. However, I'm going to bring it up early just because if you start reading other people's code, a lot of people do use it, and for good reason, because it's very convenient and it's very easy to use, but I'm not sure if we're going to use it a lot now. And it's important just when you read other people's code, maybe you wouldn't have written the same thing, but at least you will understand and you'll be able to say, hey, I get it, okay? And that's super, super important. Anonymous functions, when you think about the standard function, let's just say function standard. Just an example, okay? What we did in times past was we got the function, called it by name up in the function of main, right? That's a function too. We called the standard function named standard. We may or may not have introduced a argument up here that it would accept a parameter down here. Let's just make it simple. Let's just call it var a equals standard. Okay, so we're calling the standard and executing what's inside of here also. Okay, or at least the value here is going to equal this variable. So if we do that, it's kind of analogous to me saying there's a big, huge room of people, and one guy has a pair of scissors, the other guy has a kite, another guy has a dog, and you go into the room with a piece of string and say, hey, scissors dude, I'm calling you by name, because his first name is Scissors and last name is Dude, and you say, please cut the string, and he cuts the string, and you're all done, right? So that's the way of calling a function. What if you basically did not, if you walked into the room and there was one guy, all right? So you didn't really have to call him by name. You just pick the string up and he just cuts it because that's what he does. He's a scissors dude, right? That's his name and his function as well. So that's what an anonymous function actually does. You don't actually have to have a name of a function in order to call it. Okay, now you can't have an anonymous function down here, right? Because if you had more than one anonymous function, or even one, how would you call it if you couldn't call it by name? So here's a perfect example of an anonymous function. I ran into this the other day and just realized I probably should do a talk about this. So my list equals an integer list right here. I think you understand what's going on, pretty straightforward. Now, what if we want to use a method on the object? So we created an object, we want to use a method on it, we use a dot, right? And we go all the way down into something called, actually, we'll go through that later, for each. Now look at this. Most of these things you understand. Get range, start, so you're going to have a number, where it is, which number element, and the end element. Okay, and some of these things, you have bool, test, you have parentheses right here, and then you have an arrow and void f. So what does that actually mean? What it actually means is that for each element inside here, let's just say print, I'm going to type it out and then I'll explain it in just a second, okay? Print e, okay. What it actually says is for each element inside here, that's just how the method works. You just have to know it or you have to read about it itself. It wasn't super self-explanatory in the description as you saw. The e, okay, so for each method has the e argument. Okay, so you could put anything here, remember? So I could put a. Many times we put e. Why? I think it means event. Okay, so it's not necessary you could put anything. Most people put e, just put each because it makes it nice and standard, easy to read. For each event, so in other words, this is a method right here. It's a function right here. This is a function that's being used for an argument, right? So this is the argument, but this is for an anonymous function. There is another function in here, and the value is being used for each. Now, what's the function here? Because we don't have to call a function by name, it's encapsulated, it's whole right here. That there's nothing else to the function. You don't need to go elsewhere for it. Because it's whole right here, we're just calling an argument, okay? And remember, the arguments are each one of these according to the method. We return, or you don't return because it was void, if you remember that instruction, the documentation that we just closed on. We return nothing, so we have to do something, and that's print each and every element. Whatever is inside of here, we print right inside of here. Okay, so if we run it, what we should do is go down the list and print everything in there. Fortunately, it worked. Okay, so that's how it actually works. So when you see things like parentheses, arrow, sometimes you will see a open and close parentheses. That means it's a blank argument. There's nothing inside of there. Okay, and there's no argument. It probably doesn't do anything like needing an argument itself. I'm going to say print 5. I don't think that's going to work because according to this method, you need to add, it says if you're going to use this argument, you have to use all these other elements themselves. All right, so I hope that made sense right inside here. If it doesn't make too much sense, at least understand the concept. Let's try one more here, because we got a bunch of these themselves. So I'm going to say where. Okay, this is a confusing one. Where? Oh, let's go back to the documentation. Let's see what it actually says, though. Returns a new lazy iterable with all elements that satisfy the predicate test. Whoa. This method returns a view of the mapped elements as long. What the heck is going on here? Okay, this is what it's saying. Where we have to do a test. Okay, so where we know just by experience that there is going to have to be an element right inside of here. It calls each element right here. If that is, let's just say E dot, let's just say, because you have to do a test. So is even, okay. We want to do a method on what we have inside of here itself. So let's do the for each one. For each one of these, I'm going to say of the E, print E. All right, so what it's saying, where this test, okay, so this function is the test. If this element is going through a test, remember, you can return for a function true or false. So you can return a bool, you can return a value. If this entire function returns true, where this is true, okay, for each one that is true, get the value that did turn true and print it out. So it's kind of like an if statement, isn't it? So you could actually do a list where it's a for loop, and you could do is it even, yes, then print it out. You know, let's just do that right now, actually. So the other option, well, let's print this first of all. So it basically lists all the ones that are even. Okay, so remember, let's just do it the other way. For int I equals 0, I is less than my list, right? My list dot length I plus plus, okay? And I'm going to say if I'm sorry, my list I dot is even, okay? Print my list I. You can do the same thing. So we'll comment this one out, and it should do the same thing. See? So but it's easier just to write this way itself. Of course, let me see here. This is a one line. This is not, I was thinking of a way of simplifying this itself, like using arrows. If my list is even, now you really can't use a fat arrow in this circumstance. So it's just easier to read here than it is here. And it's easier just to type and just cruise through rather than see all these lists of the arrow, the brackets themselves. Okay. So remember, where, it's the method, this argument, okay, this is the anonymous function, right? This is the anonymous function. The entire function is used as the argument for where. But in this anonymous function, we have a value, which we know is going to be where, it's going to be each element is even, true, or false. If this is false, we go to the next value. If it is true, so if it's 3 dot is even, false, it goes to the next value. 5 dot is even, false. If it's true, then it proceeds on to the next. For each of them, for each e value that this is true, it executes this particular function. So you have two anonymous functions and two separate methods inside of here. Okay? So again, I don't really use these. Okay, I'm just not skilled enough to actually use the anonymous functions. Keep in mind that's what they are. Anytime you see this type of pattern itself, just remember what is the method, and this is the anonymous function, but keep in mind that this entire thing is an anonymous function in itself that's being used because it's first-class functions in Dart, remember, for the method or the other function itself. Okay, and remember, for our practical purposes right now, functions and methods are the same thing. They're just completely the same thing. They are actually different, and I'll explain that in the future, but for right now, they're the same thing. If you use them synonymously, nobody's going to really care. Okay? So that's it with anonymous functions. I hope this was helpful, and we'll keep going on from here on. Thanks.